Good morning, everyone. And as you're enjoying your lunches, please continue to do so. My name is Veronica Wilkerson Johnson, and I'm Director of the University of Michigan Lansing office. We are excited to have you here today to the second of our Wolverine Caucus Forum series. And today we're going to talk about why Michigan local leaders and how Michigan local leaders work on funding local government. And of course, we know how important that is. So without further ado, I'm going to call up State Representative Andy Shore. Andy Shore, many of you know, was with the Michigan Municipal League. He was an Ingham County Commissioner. He is one of our gurus here at Michigan Municipal League, and I'm so happy to say hello, Representative Andy Shore.
Thank you, everyone. It's a little weird to be standing up here at the podium. Usually I was in the audience. I worked at the League for a few years. I worked in the legislature. I was a county commissioner, so issues of local government funding are near and dear to my heart. The Wolverine Caucus is near and dear to my heart. I'm a proud alum, 97. My wife, of course, has 2 degrees from Michigan, so she tells everyone she's smarter than me, which she is. But it's great to be here. It is kind of strange to be up here as the state representative, but you know, you're all family, so if there's anything I can do to help, please contact me. Veronica knows that. She has, Mayor Hollister here, he knows that. Many of my friends from the Municipal League. We've got several mayors. We had former Mayor Hollister, Mayor of Linden, Dave Lossing. We got Nathan Tribble from East Lansing. It's such a great crowd here, so thank you, everyone. We also have Representative Martin Howerlich in the back from Troy. I'm a Democrat, he's a Republican, but we're both Wolverines, so it's nice to be a bipartisan Wolverine Caucus today. My job today is to introduce the 2 speakers, and I'm going to do that probably reading most of their bio, and then I hope you'll all enjoy the show. I wish I could stay. I actually have Michigan Competitiveness Committee at noon, so I'm kind of bummed, but I plan to get an update from Veronica. So welcome, and thanks for coming, everyone. Our first speaker today is going to be Deborah Horner. She's a project manager with Michigan's Center for Local State Urban Policy, or CLOSE-UP, on the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy, where she administers the Michigan Public Policy Survey, which is fantastic. We worked with them as a member of the Municipal League. They do great work. It's a program of statewide surveys of local government leaders in Michigan. She received her doctorate in political science from U of M in 2007. And has experience in survey research, both in academia and the private sector with Ford Motor Company. Her primary areas of research center on political attitudes and political participation, as well as local government policy and policymaking. She is also the Voter Service Chair for the League of Women Voters of Oakland County and an active volunteer at her 3 children's school. Tom Ivacco. My last name is Shore, and nobody gets it right, so it's always sensitive to me. He joined CLOSE-UP at its founding in the fall of 2001 and serves as the center manager and administrator. He also oversees the Michigan Public Policy Survey Program. He previously served as study manager, program manager, and administrator for 11 years with the National Election Studies at the U of M's Institute for Social Research. Outside of work, Tom serves as a board member and past president of a nature area nonprofit organization that focuses on stewardship and elementary school environmental educational opportunities in Ann Arbor. He has a bachelor's degree in poli-sci and a master's in public administration, both from U of M. Let's welcome them and enjoy it.
Thank you very much, Representative Shore. Appreciate the kind introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. Thanks to the Wolverine Caucus for having us. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here. The Michigan Public Policy Survey began in 2009, and in that time we have conducted 8 studies and produced about 22 reports on a wide variety of issues. We think the topic that we're talking about today is the most important thing that we've dealt with yet. This really gets to the heart of local government and their ability to help improve quality of life in Michigan's communities. I don't often speak publicly, and I have a feeling I probably am not going to be the only public speaker to do this today. But if you would indulge me for just a moment. Thank you. Couldn't pass that up, sorry. I also want to take just a moment and thank Michael Crawford is here. Michael, why don't you just hold your hand up. Michael is a key member of our team, a small team of us that run this Michigan Public Policy Survey. Michael brings a really unique perspective. He was born in the UP, but has lived his adult life as a troll, like Deborah and I, and has degrees from both Michigan and Michigan State. So his Michigan passport has been very well stamped and brings us a great perspective. I think in a kind of a classic coping mechanism, Michael tells me he's not much of a basketball fan, and so he's not particularly tormented by the experience of the last 24 hours. So while we're here to talk about fiscal health of local governments, I can report that Michael's emotional health is very good today. So we are here to talk about fiscal health of local governments, and in particular, the state of Michigan's system of funding local government and how that impacts their fiscal health and their ability to provide services. Both today, but also in the future. And so I want to start by giving just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today, so you have kind of a sense of where we are as we get into this. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the Michigan Public Policy Survey program itself, so that you have a good understanding of the data and how to interpret them. And then Deborah is going to present the findings of the report that we've just put out. And we're breaking that part of the presentation into three sections, as you can see here. The first is kind of a retrospective, looks at the last decade or so and what has happened with Michigan local governments and their ability to provide fiscal health services and the impact on their fiscal health and where they stand today, having come out of the Great Recession. The second section is prospective. It looks forward and to what local government leaders tell us they see coming down the road. And the third section is also prospective, reviews what local government leaders tell us they think should be done to help improve the fiscal health of their jurisdictions and their ability to provide public services. So quick overview of the Michigan Public Policy Survey. This is an ongoing program of opinion surveys of general purpose local governments in the state. So these are counties, cities, townships, and villages. We don't survey schools, and we don't survey special purpose or regional local governments. We take a census-based approach. Rather than taking a sampling-based approach, we try to interview every one of these units, and there are a lot of them, of course. I think most folks here know. The Michigan Public Policy Survey is kind of modeled on some other programs. So, for instance, the National League of Cities does surveys of cities across the nation based on samples. The National Association of Counties similarly surveys their members, counties across the nation, based on a sample. But as far as we know, and we've looked at this pretty carefully a few times now, as far as we can tell, the Michigan Public Policy Survey is really unique in the country in terms of being the only ongoing survey that takes this kind of census-based approach. So we think that this is a pretty unique resource for understanding local government in the state of Michigan. We try to get interviews from both the chief elected official and the chief appointed official, where there are appointed officials. And we conduct two surveys each year, one in the spring and one in the fall. The spring surveys are tracking surveys focused primarily on fiscal health and basic budget policy issues. The fall surveys change topic each year, and so we've delved into things like intergovernmental cooperation, the use of data in decision-making, performance measurement, and management, and so on. But the fall surveys change focus each time. The surveys are conducted primarily online through a web-based survey application, but we also send hard copy questionnaires to local officials who don't have good internet access, and there's still a pretty good number of them. We want to point out in particular that we run this program in a partnership with the local government associations, the Michigan Municipal League, the Michigan Townships Association, and the Michigan Association of Counties. They all have been just terrific partners with us. They help us make sure that the way we draw up these questions are going to make sense to local officials, and help us make sure that we have a thorough understanding of the topics that we're digging into. And as we develop each questionnaire, we also pull in additional topic experts from a wide variety of organizations, again, to help us make sure that we have a good understanding of the issues. I want to take just a moment and talk about why we're doing this program. With an audience like we have here today in Lansing, this probably is not quite as important as in some other presentations. But still, we want to focus first on the local governments. So as you see up here, Michigan has the 7th highest number of local governments in the state, in the nation, 1,856 of them. Most folks here are going to know, but of course counties are outlined in yellow, and they blanket the state. Villages show up here, maybe hard to see, filled in with yellow, kind of small dots, and they're scattered around the state. Cities are filled in with blue. They're also scattered around the state, but they tend to clump into, a relatively smaller number of geographic locations. And of course, they are most heavily concentrated in southeast Michigan. And townships are outlined in black, and like counties, they blanket the state. These 1,856 jurisdictions have a big impact on Michigan. The data here is a little bit old, but that actually highlights one of the reasons that we're doing MPPS. We're using census of governments data to look at the impact. These 1,856 jurisdictions spend about $26 billion per year. They employ somewhere in the range of about 150,000 people, and they hold billions of dollars in debt, both direct obligation debt that they put out, and also unfunded obligations for retirement, health care, and pensions. So those numbers alone, make it pretty self-evident that this is a big sector, and it has a big impact on the state of Michigan. But beyond those numbers, of course, again, local governments really play a key role in economic development and in helping to improve quality of life in Michigan communities. So for all of those reasons, we think it's very important to study these local governments and try to understand them better than we have in the past. Quickly, our goals in running this program. First and foremost, this is a public service activity that we're running, primarily public service and also an academic focus. On the public service end, our most immediate goals with these surveys are to get the findings and the data back to local government leaders themselves so that they have a better understanding of the kinds of challenges and opportunities that peer communities are facing around the state, and what kind of actions those peer communities are taking to deal with their challenges. We also want to inform state policymakers and other stakeholders. A wide range of stakeholders are very interested in these issues. And so we think the data that we're gathering are not available from any other source. And so we want to inform the policymaking process and policy discussions. One thing that's not quite as obvious, we also have a goal of building a long-term longitudinal data archive that will track fundamental issues over time. We hope there's no end date to this Michigan Public Policy Survey program, that it continues for decades into the future. And so as fundamental things change, like Michigan's economy, transitioning from a manufacturing-based economy to a service and a knowledge-based economy, that will present different kinds of challenges and opportunities for local governments. And so we want to build up a data archive to track those things and track how local governments are responding. Same thing with Michigan demographics. We all know the population of Michigan is going to be aging in the coming decades, and that will present new kinds of challenges to local governments. And so we want to build up data that will help us all understand better how local governments are responding to those challenges, and hopefully spread best practices and kind of innovative solutions across the state. And finally, we are an academic organization at the University of Michigan, and we have an academic mission. We are working to get these data into the classroom to foster student teaching and student interest in Michigan specifically, but also in local government issues. And we're sharing these data with other academic researchers. We have sent all these data to a team up here at Michigan State next door. And for the local officials, we want to make sure everybody understands that we take respondent confidentiality extremely seriously. Before we share the data, we have a rigorous process that folks who are going to use the data have to sign off, their institutions have to sign off, their institutional review boards have to ensure that respondent confidentiality will be protected. But we very much want to get these data out into academic research as well. I am almost done here, but we also want to take just a moment to point out that this MPPS program is not a typical kind of opinion poll, the kind of thing that we all got used to last fall during the presidential elections. A lot of those polls tend to be, the quick turnaround, 2 days in the field, shelf life of the findings are, a week or so. Of course, there's absolutely nothing wrong with those kind of polls. They serve an important purpose, but that's not the model for the MPPS. There's a number of things that make this program a little bit different, and first of all is the census-based approach that we're taking, where we try to get responses from every unit of local government. We work extremely hard at that. We stay in the field for about 7 weeks during each field period. We send multiple recontact requests to all of these local officials by email, by phone, by fax. And in the last 3 waves, we have received responses from 72% of these local jurisdictions. For survey research, that's remarkable. Very few opinion surveys will reach a 72% response rate. And what that does for us is gives us great confidence that the data are truly representative. Michigan, of course, is a large state. It's diverse in terms of its population, its economy, its geography, and its communities. And so its local governments are also very diverse. And so by taking a census-based approach and getting such high response rates, we have a lot of confidence that the data that we're dealing with truly represent this broad diversity. The last thing I'll point out here is we're also very committed to transparency. So we put all of our questionnaires up onto the MPPS website so that anyone can see what questions we've asked and how we've asked them to make sure that they're not biased. This is not a push poll. We put all of the data online in ways that are easy to interpret. Again, it protects respondent confidentiality, but it makes these data accessible to non-statisticians. So any stakeholder who's interested in these things should be able to interpret all the questions that we've asked. And again, we share the data with other researchers so they have the opportunity to replicate our research if they'd like, if there's any concerns on that front. So we are very committed to transparency. Being at the University of Michigan, we are committed to the university's goals of excellence in what we're doing. And so we take all of that very seriously, and we just want to make sure that's well known. There's some other issues up here. This PowerPoint will be available on our website. We put all these up there as well. So I won't review the rest of that, but if you have any colleagues who are interested, this will be available soon. Last thing I wanted to do is just to show you what one of these surveys looks like. It's kind of hard to read. Sorry about that, but that actually kind of makes one of the points, which is these are the first 2 pages from our survey, the hard copy version from last spring. That was a 7-page survey document, so we had 7 pages that look like this. You can see we ask a lot of questions, we cover a lot of ground with these local officials, and so it's pretty demanding of them. And so the fact that we've gotten these 72% response rates, we're extremely grateful for that kind of participation. So that's the introduction to the MPPS. Now Deborah Horner will present the findings that you've come to hear about today.
Hi, thank you for sitting through that infomercial on the MPPS. I appreciate it. Let's get right to the findings that you came to hear about. Let me begin my part of this presentation by taking a very brief walk through the recent history of Michigan's local government's fiscal stress over the past decade and take a look at what local leaders foresee about our future. So, as most, or probably all of you in this room know, our local governments have spent the past decade facing a fiscal crisis stemming from a number of compounding factors, including cuts to revenue sharing, increases in costs of service provision, and decreases in property tax revenue. So this figure that I'm displaying up here is a chart created by the House Fiscal Agency showing the trend since 1997 in revenue sharing monies transferred from the state to local governments across the state. And the bottom shaded section of each bar represents the constitutionally mandated revenue sharing, which has remained pretty stable over time. It's constitutionally mandated. However, you can see that starting in about 2001, the statutory revenue sharing available to certain local governments across the state has been cut, and then it has been transformed into the Economic Vitality Incentive Program, also known as EVIP, in 2011, and then that revenue was cut as well. So revenue sharing for local governments available to shore up their budgets has taken a serious hit over the past few years. But as tough as that hit has been to local governments' budgets, even harder have been the blows from the widespread drop in property tax that has come as the result of the housing sector collapse that began in 2008. Property taxes are the backbone of local government budgets, and yet statewide taxable value, by some estimates, is down by, say, 20% since 2007, and it may take until 2023 or 2027 to reach back to those levels if we make it that far. Top that with the rising costs of service provision, and you potentially end up with a hole in your budget if you're a local government that you could drive a truck through. So during this time, local officials were busy putting out fires, or their firefighters were putting out fires, and they were putting out figurative fires by working to react to these stresses and the declines in their revenue. So on the MPPS, we've tracked some of the actions that our local leaders have told us they've been taking in terms of their retrenchment efforts, their efforts to plug the holes in their budgets. So you can see that in 2010, for example, at the height of the Great Recession, almost half ended up increasing their reliance on their general fund balances, including 63% of the state's largest jurisdictions doing so. Then we also saw jurisdictions all across the state, year after year, 2010, 2011, 2012, decreasing their staff, decreasing the services they provide, increasing their intergovernmental cooperation efforts in order to cut costs, and increasing what they're asking their employees to pay in terms of things like health insurance. And so you can see that in 2012, 81% of the state's largest jurisdictions, those over 30,000, said they had asked just in the past year for their employees to take more of the burden of health care on themselves. So as we've emerged from the Great Recession to a new normal of smaller government, we see that employment levels are down across the state about 8.6% since their peak in the early 2000s, and service provision is down, and our infrastructure is suffering a little bit. However, as governments have cut and the worst of the economic storm has seemed to have passed, we see local government officials less likely to tell us they're in trouble. So one of the main metrics for fiscal stress that we like to ask on the MPPS is a question about whether jurisdictions are better able or less able to meet their financial needs this year compared to the year just previous. And so in the peak in 2010, 61% of jurisdictions across the state, large and small, told us they were less able to meet their needs than they had been in 2009. But since then, things have been easing. So in 2011, only 48% told us the same. And then in last year, in 2012, only 34% said they were going to have more trouble, they were going to be less able to meet their fiscal needs. Now, don't be scared of this slide. It's the exact same slide as the one I just showed you, except this time I've broken it down by population category. We'd like to break out our data on the MPPS because, as Tom mentioned, we have a census survey. We have over 1,300 responses to the survey, and that allows us to break the data down and yet still be really confident about what it represents. And so we break the data down because the different jurisdictions of different population size have different experiences. And you can see that we've broken it down by populations of less than 1,500, 1,500 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, 10,000 to 30,000, and then those jurisdictions above 30,000. And what you can see is, if you kind of look at the pattern, the largest jurisdictions have been the ones that have been the most heavily burdened by the fiscal stress of the past 4 years. But at the same time, the pattern of easing within 2011, 2012 is similar across all the different jurisdictions, large and small. So we have some more good news as well. We've had local leaders give us some positive reports about two other key indicators of fiscal stress: the size of their general fund balances and their available cash flow. So you remember earlier, just now, I mentioned how many local governments over the past few years have been forced to rely more heavily on their general fund balances. Well, as you can see from this slide, last year, in 2012, people were generally feeling like, well, I think we're okay. 61% of local leaders across the state said that they feel like the level of their general fund balances was just about right. Now, I have to put a big asterisk there because if you look at the far left, or I guess you're right, you can see that the largest jurisdictions still among those, more than almost half, 41% say that they still feel their general fund balances are too low. But similarly, statewide, most jurisdictions say that this past year, cash flow was okay, with only about 8% saying that it was either a significant or somewhat of a problem, and by comparison, 26% saying it was really not much of a problem, and 65% in total saying it's not a problem at all for their jurisdictions. So general fund balances, cash flow, things are looking okay. And interestingly enough, in spite of cuts in local services that we've seen, drastic cuts in services, there's actually widespread satisfaction among local leaders regarding the package of services that their jurisdictions offer today. More than 3/4, 79% of local officials overall say that they are somewhat satisfied or very satisfied with their current service offerings. Oh, just as a rule of thumb in my graphics, blue is good, green is bad. So again, if I break it down by population size, this is one sentiment that's shared pretty widely across different jurisdictions of different sizes. Although you might expect, because the larger jurisdictions have borne a heavier burden with their service cuts and the fiscal stress, their local officials feel pretty satisfied with their services as well. So you can see that that service provision today is going well. Interestingly enough, it's not only the local officials themselves who feel that their service packages are satisfactory, but they also think their citizens are satisfied. 79% say that we think their citizens are satisfied with the package of services we're offering today. 82% think that their county board or their township board or their city council is satisfied with their services. And even 69% say that their local businesses are satisfied. So here we are. We've seen the state's economy improve slowly in the aftermath of the Great Recession, and more of Michigan's local governments currently reporting they're surprisingly okay. They're either holding steady or maybe even improving a little bit in their ability to meet their fiscal needs and with their right-sized service provision. But now a new question presents itself. Will local government be able to sustain their operations at this new normal level? Or will they face further retrenchment if the state's system of funding local government does not keep up with the rising costs for the future? As costs continue to rise, many officials worry that revenues will not keep pace, and due in part to limits on property tax revenue established by the Michigan Constitution's Headley Amendment and by Proposal A. So, although some local governments have been able to stabilize their current operations at reduced funding levels, there is concern among the local officials that we've surveyed that their local governments are going to come up short in the future, and that it's going to force a new round of local government retrenchment. So we asked them. The MPPS asked local leaders, do you believe that Michigan's current system of funding local government will provide adequate revenue in the coming years, assuming that the economy continues to grow, that will allow you to maintain package of services you currently provide? Fewer than half, 43% across the state, believe that the funding system will allow them to maintain their current service package in the future, even with continued economic development. So optimism on this issue is primarily found in Michigan's smaller jurisdictions, which coincidentally tend to offer fewer services. And even among those smaller jurisdictions, that's the group over here, less than half feel like they can maintain services going forward, even if the economy continues to improve. Now, among our larger jurisdictions, the outlook is even more pessimistic, where only 22% of leaders in the largest jurisdictions believe the funding system will allow them to maintain what they're doing now. But maintaining might not be enough. One of the other issues that the MPPS covers over time is we look at whether service demands at the local level are increasing or decreasing compared to the previous year. And you can see that when we asked local leaders about whether their public safety needs were increasing or decreasing compared with 2011, in 2012, they said, across the board, they're still going up. Now, compare this to that slide I showed you earlier where everyone said, oh, our fiscal less able ability to meet our needs is getting better. Service provision and public safety is not getting better. And in fact, infrastructure is even more dire. Many jurisdictions have been delaying infrastructure improvements and maintenance for some day in the future where there may be more money available. And at some point, just like the state is doing now, many local governments are realizing they're going to have to pay that infrastructure piper. And you can see that our local government leaders are reporting to us that their infrastructure needs are just rising. They're not easing in the same way that some of the economic stress is. So in other words, our local governments don't just need to maintain the services that they're offering today. They need to be able to increase with their increasing service demands. So we asked them, what if you need to improve today's services? Perhaps more police officers to deal with those increasing public safety demands, or improving the roads and the sewers and the water systems to deal with the aging infrastructure. Well, our local officials say good luck with that, because only 26% say that Michigan's system of funding local governments today will provide adequate revenue for them to improve their current services or add new services. Almost 2 in 10 strongly disagree that they will be able to improve or add to services under their current system of revenue. Among the state's largest jurisdictions, only 14% believe that the current system of funding will allow them to improve or add to their package of services in the future. And almost half strongly disagree that this system is going to be workable for them. And these responses, remember, are based on a scenario where the economy is going to continue to improve, hypothetically. And so that makes the outlook even worse if Michigan's economy were to stagnate or to take another turn for the worse anytime soon. So this has been a presentation so far of good news and bad news. Good news being the darkest times appear to be behind us, and local jurisdictions, as a result of their retrenchment during the Great Recession, seem to have come out the other side okay. The bad news is, according to local officials all across the state, the outlook is not good for the long term. So what do they think should happen next to forestall further cuts in local budgets that have already seen years of cuts and right-sizing, and to protect the services that they're currently satisfied with? Well, we asked them. First of all, we asked them if they believe that there should be significant reform in the current system of funding local governments. And indeed, 58% say they either strongly or somewhat agree that the system for funding local government in Michigan needs significant reform. And only 16% disagree that reform is necessary. Now, given that our larger jurisdictions have faced some more severe fiscal challenges over the last decade, it's not surprising that the belief in the need to reform the current system of funding local government is more common among the state's larger jurisdictions. Among those local leaders from large jurisdictions, 77% say the system needs significant reform, including 51% who strongly agree. But even among the state's smallest jurisdictions, the ones who haven't been hit as hard, the ones who potentially are more conservative, a majority, 52%, agree that significant reforms are necessary. Now you can see one of the nice ways we can cut our data is we do ask about partisan identification. And you can see that the notion of significant reform is relatively bipartisan support. There are some slight differences in partisan identification of Michigan's local leaders on this issue. Those who identify themselves as independents and Democrats are slightly more likely. Both of them, 63 and 62%, say that they agree that there needs to be significant reform of the system for funding local governments. But a majority of Republican officials, 55%, also believe the system is in need of reform. All right, this is a busy slide, so let me take a second on it. Among those people who said, yes, we believe this system needs reforming, we asked them, how important, if at all, do you believe it is to significantly reform specific areas within that intertwined system of funding for your local jurisdiction? The dark blue represents the percentage of officials who said it was very important to reform something. The light blue is somewhat important, and the green is not at all important. So among the potential areas of reform to some of the different sources of revenue for local governments, the state's gas tax has the most widespread support, with 89% of local officials saying that this is in need of reform. And this corresponds, of course, to some of the policy issues coming out of Lansing here right now. Widespread support for reform also is expressed for the sales tax. I'm going to just kind of go down the line in terms of percentage of support. The Headley Amendment that deals with property tax issues at the local level. Proposal A, constitutional revenue sharing, and the personal property tax. 78% of local officials believe that needs to be reformed. Now, it should be noted this survey was taken in 2012 in the spring, and so it doesn't really deal with what happened at the end of the year last year when the legislature took up personal property tax. In addition, the Economic Vitality Incentive Program, EVIP, which replaced the former statutory revenue sharing, is also a target for reform among a lot of local officials. Statewide, it has about 64% who said it's very important to reform this. But if you only look at the jurisdictions that actually receive EVIP funding, 90% of those local officials said that we need to reform the EVIP program. The MPPS also found some support, but not as significant, at much lower levels, for reforming things like local income tax and the ability for local jurisdictions to have an income tax, and for regional taxation. So, after we asked the respondent to rank and rate some of those various issues, we followed up with an open-ended question, a big box, that allowed them to write in whatever they wanted. And we asked them to tell us how they thought these specific elements should be reformed, in particular the ones they felt to be most important. So we ended up with a wide variety of answers on this. They didn't particularly, you can imagine, people had a lot to say on how they thought it should happen and what they thought should do. But what we did is we analyzed this qualitative data, which can also, I like to be cautionary about sharing qualitative data. Sometimes it's anecdotal rather than some of the quantitative data I just shared. But I want to tell you a little bit about what they told us in terms of what we should do next. The most common recommendations focused on issues related to the property tax, particularly the Headley Amendment and Proposal A. And within this area, the bulk of suggestions related either to eliminating Headley, eliminating Prop A, or reforming these laws in order to provide more funding for local jurisdictions and more flexibility. So recommendations for reform included things like easing the current revenue caps. They suggested that we should either remove or ease the automated millage rollbacks, or to allow millage roll-ups, and or find ways to deal with this previously unforeseen, the effects of the housing sector collapse on their ability to raise property tax revenue. So, the next most common set of recommendations that people gave us when they filled in this open-end question on the survey dealt with the sales tax, and with specific emphasis on increasing the rate of the tax, increasing the tax base. So, for example, adding specific services that could be taxed under the sales tax, adding food, adding internet sales, things like that, or allowing local sales taxes or local control of state's tax revenues. It's interesting, this person gave us this quote, I cut it off, but he goes on to say, I believe it's he goes on to say, it's a bit like a three-legged stool. Right now we only have the ability to collect revenues from one leg of the stool, that's property tax, and as a result the whole system is unbalanced. Making it possible to levy a local sales tax or easier to levy an income tax would rebalance the stool and allow us to reduce property tax rates. So I thought that was an interesting quote from that person. I also want to share with you that issues related to revenue sharing, both constitutional revenue sharing and EVIP, were the third most common area of respondents feel are important to reform and what they wanted to tell us about how to reform them. Within this area, suggestions clustered around things like providing more funding. Ha, really? Thanks. We need to provide more funding for revenue sharing. But really, they also specifically asked for more stability and predictability. So many of our local jurisdictions now are trying to do forecasting or multi-year budgeting, and if they don't know how much money they can expect to come from the state government, it's very difficult for them to work that into their long-term budgeting processes. They also talked a lot about eliminating EVIP. By either restoring the prior version of statutory revenue sharing, which was applied by a formula to certain jurisdictions, or simply moving that block of EVIP funds into the existing constitutional revenue sharing system that's statewide. Quite a few comments from leaders on EVIP also focused around this idea that the local governments are being forced to jump through hoops, penalizing jurisdictions by not providing EVIP funds for jurisdictions that had already done things that EVIP was trying to incentivize, and getting less funding for they used to get during the statutory revenue sharing program, even while needing to do more work to meet these the standards set by the state. So all in all, there were 385 local leaders who gave us over 880 suggestions for how the system should be reformed. So even though they don't all say the same thing, what you can see, what I want you to take away from it, is a sense that there's a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of eagerness at the local level to begin the process of changing the current system into a better system for them and a better system for the state. So now that everyone's done with dessert, and in case you were fooling with your iPad, let me summarize a little bit of what we found through this particular part of our survey research. First of all, despite years of retrenchment among Michigan's local governments, most local leaders say, hey, we're satisfied with our current package of services that we're offering. However, fewer than half, 43%, believe that our current way of funding their local governments, in all of its myriad ways, only 43% believe that they'll be able to maintain their services under that system, and only 26% say that they'll be able to improve or add to those services, given the kinds of revenue streams that they have right now. Of the 58% who say yes, significant reform is necessary for this system, they cite the gas tax, they point to the sales tax, the Headley Amendment, Proposal A, and revenue sharing that all need reform. So it'd be easy to look at the signs of economic recovery and think, hey, local governments are in the clear. As they go through have gone through this period of recession and move forward, many local leaders will continue to look for cost savings, for efficiencies, and for opportunities to boost intergovernmental approaches. I'm sure they will find some, but they've been working in this area a long time now. They've been hoeing these fields, and what's left are really bare bones. So according to the voices that we've heard from all across the state, without significant reform to the system of funding local governments, there are going to be more cuts to the services they provide, and there'll probably be a new round of retrenchment in the future, with fiscal health preserved largely by very severe cuts. So before I take a break from up here from speaking and open things up to comments from you, I do want to focus your attention just quickly back on what Tom said about the MPPS program as a source of important insights about local government here in Michigan. I want to extend the invitation to you to please contact us if you have ideas for future survey content, for the kinds of topics or questions we should ask, and also how to get the data best into your hands to make it actionable for you as policymakers. So this is our email address. Any suggestions you have are welcome. Please contact us. And thank you so much for having us here today. And I'd like to open it up for questions. And I'm going to invite Tom to come back up too so he can help me with these.
Does your survey address the question for local governments as it relates to the retention of young people in the state? This is some of the initiatives that the state government is looking at through the NBDC and some of the retention and attraction of young people, knowledge-based creatives. Does it address like the local initiatives that are around keeping people there in their local areas?
Right, yeah. So she asked whether the MPPS survey ever looks at retention of young workers and of knowledge-based initiatives across the state. And so, you want to answer?
Yeah, we have actually done that on a few occasions. I think the first time we touched on it was actually back in the first year in 2009. We asked a series of questions about the brain drain and how it was impacting different kinds of communities in the state. I don't, off the top of my head, recall what those responses were, but that's available on our website, which you can get through here on our homepage, closeup.umich.edu, where we have all those pre-run data tables. So we have that data specifically about the brain drain. Related to that, we've asked a few other batteries over time. We've asked about placemaking activities to try to build these vibrant communities that will attract and retain talented folks, particularly including younger segments. That also was fairly early on. What I do recall from that in particular was a lot of enthusiasm at the local level for placemaking as an economic development strategy that local officials think can be pretty successful.
We also just recently had a survey in the field in the fall 2012, so our most recent survey, which the data should be coming out literally any day now, be made publicly available. But we did ask on that survey about citizen engagement, and particularly reaching out to groups within the community that maybe don't usually participate in local government, including young people. So that's some information there as well. Thanks. Oh, Bill. We do have to remember that this is an opinion survey. And one of the things we don't want to do is force the respondent to have to get up and go look something up. So it's not necessarily an audit. It's an idea of getting their sense. And what we hope is, because we have such a large respondent group, that we're going to get a good sense, even if it's not precise about specific numbers. But we do ask specifically about, we have asked in the past a series of questions about GASB debt and obligations to post-employment health insurance and things like that for retirees. We ask about their current employees, previous employees, current officials, previous officials, and all of the responsibilities they have to either salary and health care, and then post-employment health care as well. Now, what we ask them to say is, do you think this is a significant, somewhat of a problem, not much of a problem, not at all a problem for your jurisdiction's fiscal health? So we try to get the sense of, do you have it, and then do you think it's a problem? So that's the kind of questions we're asking on that phrase. And we do carry that wave over wave so that we can get a sense of, is that changing as we come out of this recessionary time? Is that changing based on relationships with unions and what's going on? We've also asked in the past some batteries on union negotiations and whether they've negotiated over with their particular unions, if they have them, on issues like healthcare and other kinds of services.
Yeah, we also, on the infrastructure front, we ask whether local governments are increasing or decreasing the amount of funding that they're putting into infrastructure, as well as whether or not their infrastructure needs are increasing or decreasing. And on the question of retirement benefits and health care and so on, we've had quite a few different questions on that front. And one of the things that we have been tracking over the last few years is more and more of these local leaders telling us that if they were previously in a defined benefit only plan, only providing pensions, that they're moving increasingly to defined contribution plans, especially as they bring on new hires, they're moving them into 401k type plans. So it's been a pretty active front that we've seen in the responses, local government leaders saying these are big issues and they're taking a pretty wide range of actions to deal with them.
Sense for the diversity and how that was understood, or what should we take from X% of local leaders said a policy should be reformed? What direction does that give us?
Well, that's a good question. And, as Deborah pointed out, this is an opinion survey. So, in many of these cases we say, whatever reform means to you. I think, what we try to do sometimes is to try to kind of triangulate responses. And so in seeing the types of open-ended suggestions that we got from people, we can kind of get a sense of what they were thinking reform should be. And in this case, it really is all over the map. So on the sales tax, for instance, there are some folks who said we should, just increase the sales tax rate. It's currently 6%, it should go to 8%. There were other folks who said that we should decrease the sales tax rate, and they left it at that. Other folks said we should decrease the sales tax rate, but increase the base to start covering, as Deborah had said, food and other kinds of services that are not taxed right now. So the types of open-ended responses that we got from folks, I think, really gave us a good sense that when they were thinking reform, they were thinking pretty specifically about the technical aspects of how they're funded right now and the problems that the current laws are presenting. And most of the responses, I think, were really focused on how to improve it. As Deborah said, to provide a better sense going forward. Less of this not knowing what's coming next, so some more stability, and ultimately, most of the responses came down to finding ways to increase funding after this decade of cuts.
Go ahead.
Have you attempted to interface your questions with education services, particularly K-12, and also with respect to the need to, revise the way education is being funded?
Oh, okay.
No, we actually have not asked about education funding, although we did get into, obviously, Proposal A.
And we also asked some education batteries. What
We,
did we ask
yeah,
about
we
that?
do. We have asked a couple of questions about what local leaders think is happening in terms of the education within their communities, whether their school systems are, doing a good job or a bad job in terms of producing students who are ready for college or are ready for the local job market and or the global job market. We did a battery of that, I think, back in 2009, and we actually just repeated that again last fall, spring. Within the last year, we repeated some of those batteries. But we haven't gotten into school funding per se as its own standalone.
You might be interested, and you may already know, that there's a Michigan Council of Local Governments into which the school boards and the school districts participate,
Right.
along with municipalities and counties, townships, and so
Right,
forth.
right.
So it's, and I was part of that at one point. We tried to look at it as a unit.
Right.
You couldn't just say, well, you've got cities, counties, and townships over here, and schools are something separate.
Yeah.
You have to look at the totality of it.
Right. We do as much as possible try to link up our data with other data from external sources. So, for example, we link it up with census data to talk about what these communities look like in terms of their, ethnic makeup or costs or service provisions based on the census of local governments and then the actual census. We've linked it up with the EVIP data so we could see people who were getting EVIP money versus people who weren't and some differences in their attitudes. We've linked, so there's a number of data sources external to the MPPS that we can draw in and give us a sense of what's going on. Maybe I don't want to say an objective level because I do believe our local government respondents are objective, but from a different source, and we can kind of triangulate from it. And school data is tricky in that it does overlap a lot of different jurisdictional lines, but we would like to try to do that at some point. Yes?
A couple quick questions or points. One, on the reforms, you explained some of them.
Right.
Income tax. What's the income tax reform? Well,
Right.
some of us here are working on gas tax. I'm curious. That was top of the list. What on earth are gas taxes? Increasing gas tax?
Right.
Letting local governments just take all the gas tax? I mean, what were we talking about?
Well, that was the really crazy thing about these open-end responses. People would say, raise the gas tax, and you'd say, people, lower the gas tax, right? So the local officials look very much like people across the state of Michigan in terms of their differences of opinion. One of the things we found with the gas tax, one of the suggestions people gave, was the idea of tying it to a per gallon calculation instead of a, what, is that right? It's the opposite, I'm sorry. So linking it to the purchase price rather than the per gallon. So things like that. I think that my sense from the people who said gas tax was one of their things was they were just looking for a way to increase the pot of monies available to the state and local governments for and just improving how we use that tax. Less about the giving it to the local governments themselves, and just that's a tax reform that needs to happen.
I think one of the concerns that bubbled up in a number of those gas tax open-ended responses is the same kind of thing that's shared by a lot of people, which is as fuel economy for vehicles increases and the current gas tax is based on a per gallon fee, 19 cents per gallon, that the revenue is going down. As fewer miles are.
Right, so and so it did. Right.
Yeah.
And so our local officials are on it. I guess that would be that they're paying attention to what you're doing here. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a suggestion
Sorry, you're
about an additional way to tabulate the data.
Great.
Michigan has a small number of large cities and a huge number of small communities.
Right.
So those tabulations that are just based on the entire sample are really essentially a reflection of the opinions of small communities, leaders of small communities. Now you go partway toward addressing that by breaking down the responses into categories.
Right.
So you have the largest category, communities of 30,000 or more. So from the standpoint of Detroit or Grand Rapids or Lansing, 30,000 is kind of
Small.
small town. It's not
Right.
what someone from Detroit would think of as, these are the largest communities in Michigan. So my suggestion is that in addition to keeping those two ways of tabulating the data, which provide very important perspectives, have a third way of tabulating the data, which is population weighted. So weight the response of each survey by the population of that community. And I think the population weighted
thanks. That's a great idea. We do have to be careful not to cut the data so finely as that we can then say, oh, well, that's Flint, Grand Rapids, and Detroit right there, right? So we do have to be a little bit careful. That's one of the reasons why we do bundle those larger jurisdictions together, so you can't pick out which, and because of the, Pontiac's problems are so very idiosyncratic compared with the Grand Rapids or Kalamazoo's. But I agree that when we report out the total number, among all jurisdictions, that is definitely heavily weighted to small townships because that's the predominant system, local government that we have. And so, and those are not the ones that necessarily have all of the population. On the other hand, 52% or more, I'm trying to remember, a majority of people in the state do live in townships, so it is a good sense of local governments as a whole. But you're right, I think that looking at it by population will be very helpful. We're also trying to develop this would be a good group to ask about this. We're also trying to develop a variable that lets us look at specifically at urban areas versus suburban and then rural. Because I think there's small villages that are very close to Detroit or close to Pontiac, and then there's large cities that are kind of out, in Marquette. And so, so it would be interesting to develop that variable. It's been challenging, though, to figure out how to actually measure that and what would be the relevant breakdowns in that variable. But we appreciate that feedback. Thank you. Wait, I said you next. Sorry.
It's obvious in your survey, absence of it would be the whole question of consolidation in regards to reform.
Right.
But there is one means that could address that issue. My question to you is there a reason why you have not included consolidation? I know it's not totally popular, but it is a reality.
Yeah, we actually did ask a question. I'm just standing up here realizing that we're 4 years into the survey, so we've done 8 year surveys now, and Tom and I are kind of having an encyclopedic knowledge of what we've asked in the past, but that's pretty soon we're going to run out of memory space in our brains for that. But I will tell you that we did, in fall of 2010, we did an entire survey on intergovernmental cooperation. And as a part of that survey, we asked questions about both cooperative and consolidating specific services and actual consolidation with other jurisdictions. So, and we got local officials said, would you support consolidating with if it made economic sense, if it was economically feasible? And then we asked if we thought their board would, we asked if they thought their citizens would, and we asked if they thought their local businesses would. So we have asked a question on that. It's from 2010, but it does give you a sense of both what they think in terms of how feasible it would be politically, but then also what they think people in their communities believe about both partial consolidation of services and then full consolidation. So that's from 2010.
We also ask on each survey, each spring survey, we ask about their plans for intergovernmental cooperation going forward. And in each of the last 4 years, we ask about, actually, I don't know if you recall that first page of the questionnaire with a long list of topics. From that long list of decisions that local governments are going to be making going forward, whether increasing spending on public safety, cutting spending on public safety, and so on, increasing their intergovernmental cooperation has been the most common action that local governments say that they're going to take. So, I think there really is a perception that intergovernmental cooperation is not, it's a hot topic and a lot of folks don't want to do it. What we found was 72% of local governments say they're already in some kind of formal intergovernmental cooperative agreement. And that's from the full 1,856 jurisdictions. Among the biggest jurisdictions, it's even higher. And among those leaders who are doing this kind of stuff, there's overwhelming support for it. 81% say that it's been successful at meeting their goals, whether it was cost savings or service improvements and so on.
But I want to make a distinction between intergovernmental cooperation and consolidation.
Yes, yeah.
As you know, consolidation, we're talking about losing identity of the
Yeah.
And I know that's not popular, but it is a vehicle that could address some.
Yes, you're right. So the question, the point is differences between cooperation on individual services versus full jurisdictional consolidations. We did ask that question about full consolidations, and it's probably the type of thing that we will ask every few years going forward so we can track, whether those kind of fundamental views are changing as well.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
I want to say a couple things. Number one, the comment earlier about the use of the language reform, I think doesn't get at some of the things, thinking specifically about the income tax. We asked a little few that doesn't the other piece is that you didn't mention in your presentation today, but the data broke out by units of government, and there's a huge difference there.
Right.
Because everybody is affected so differently by how the state is supporting them. And there are a lot of answers in the data for a particular unit of government where there's a wide differentiation between what the overall asset and what the cities say versus what townships.
Right. So he's pointing out that not only do we do population size, which I think is a really important way of cutting the data. Small jurisdictions, whether they're villages or townships, look really different from counties or cities. But he said we do break the data down. Any of the data we have will be on the web, and it's broken out by cities, townships, villages, and cities. So you can see the differences between the specific units. It doesn't differentiate between the size of those units, but you can say villages have a very serious difference from cities. Cities have a very serious set of constraints or challenges from townships. So that all of that data for every question we have is on the web. Yep.
The second part of the question is dealing with income tax for places that don't have it. Those actually were some of the open-ended responses that we got from places that don't have it now, suggesting that currently, I believe, only cities can have local income taxes in Michigan, and so some of the suggestions were to open up that capability to other types of jurisdictions. And we did, on a previous survey, I don't recall off the top of my head which one it was, we asked local officials if they had greater authority at the local level to change their mix of revenue, how likely do they think it would be that they would introduce an income tax? How likely would it be that they would introduce a sales tax or increase their property tax? Introducing an income tax was the lowest. The fewest number of local leaders told us that they thought that would happen if they had the capability. I think there's a lot of concern at the local level about taking that on.
Yes.
Do you ever question people, what percentage of people actually desire to privatize essential services like education and police, as opposed to country money, just privatize education and police?
Yes, so the question is, do we ask about privatization of services? And we do. That's one of the annual tracking questions on the spring surveys. We ask whether local governments are likely to increase or decrease privatization efforts. And what we found over the last 4 years is a fairly steady percent of local jurisdictions, and again, it's higher in the big jurisdictions, are planning to privatize some services, but it's not nearly as common as intergovernmental cooperation or relying on their general fund balance and so on. But there's a fairly steady percentage of local jurisdictions looking to privatize. The question is, do we get into the specifics of privatizing education or police and so on? No, we don't get into that, quite that specific. It's more a slightly higher level of question about any services are you looking to increase or decrease privatization levels.
Oh, hi, yes. You know, off the top of my head, I don't know that particular variable, what our average tenure is. It's high. We have a lot of people in office for a long time in our townships, especially that we survey. But we do look at data, as I showed you in this particular one, we've broken it down by partisan identification. But we've looked at data by gender, so looking at male versus female local officials. We've looked at age and education. A lot of times when we're doing our analyses, we'll run a more sophisticated statistical model, a regression, where we take all of those things into account at the same time. So we can say, okay, it's not gender, it's not education level, it's actually whether you're from a city or from a township. And so we usually, you won't necessarily see those in our reflected in some of our findings because they don't play out as actually important. But when they do, we pull them out. In fact, we're looking at there's a gender split in some of the data we're looking at right now about citizen engagement that we'll be interested in. I literally do not. I can't tell you what the you know. I use that variable, but I don't actually usually look at it in and of itself.
Michael, do you have any recollection?
No.
Okay.
But if you really want to know, I have my laptop here, and I could look it up for you after we're done. But we do like to incorporate that, and we're very fortunate that our local officials are willing to share that information with us. We get very few won't respond. We tell people that you don't have to respond to any part of the survey. Skip the things you don't like and go on. And people are very forthcoming with partisan identification, with tenure, with a lot of other things. So, yeah.
Just to kind of respond to that, I've been a local elected official for 14 years. The last day was the day of my term. So, and on my council, it ranges from 4 years to 25 years of service. And it defers you go out of state.
Right.
There was a colleague of mine who served on the MML board that's been out of the city of Broadway. He's a high school teacher who's been there for 30 years.
Right. Right.
So, just to kind of
No term limits at the local level. Yes, hi.
The real, where the rubber hits the road in all of this, of course, for elected policymakers, is it just the sort of technical survey of what local government officials are thinking? It's also what the public at large feel about these things. And I understand your function is a social researcher, but there are folks in Everett who do some of that. Has there been any effort at looking at how to triangulate this kind of survey work with that kind of survey work? Policymakers would be interested to know, once you can define what reform means, how different.
Do you want to do this? Yes,
I
yes.
don't
The
know
answer.
on that,
I
so-
feel like you're like throwing a little softball on the plate for us. Thank you.
The question, the question is whether we try to take into account public opinion in addition to, in survey research, the surveys we do are called elite opinion because they're local leaders. We do. We've thought about this pretty carefully. We have some experience actually in working with the State of the State survey conducted by IPSR at MSU. Charlie Ballard oversees that group. And we're thinking about doing that again. One of the slight difficulties is the public opinion surveys tend to be, the number of responses are going to represent the state at large, whereas our surveys, it's a little bit difficult to link up community opinion with our community leaders, but we can still take kind of that very high level approach to this. And we've thought about it in the past. We've stepped into it a little bit, and I think we're likely to try and do it again. In fact, we're talking right now with Professor Rex Lamore, also at MSU, about trying to do something along those lines on tax issues.
In fact, when we originally formulated our survey, we took some of the questions that they carry on the State of the State survey, which is a quarterly survey of Michigan citizens specifically, and we put those on our survey as some of our tracking items so that we could match up with what when people say, how do you think things are going in the state, we could match that up with. So we've looked at that, and we've actually done some comparison and some findings reports about direction the state is taking. You know, were we in the wrong track or going the right direction, and looking at elites versus citizens. But like Tom says, it's harder to match up Grand Rapids elites versus with Grand Rapids citizens, and you know, it doesn't really necessarily go because they're doing a sample survey of citizens. But we can do it at the state level. It's nice.
I think the other difficulty we face that would be valuable to overcome it is to get it. I think Bob's question over here kind of goes to this: of what does reform mean? The detail makes a big difference in looking at all this. It's easy to get a survey result where 80% of the population thinks reforming the gas tax is a good idea. That doesn't tell anybody much about that. And so how to break that down into some more meaningful kind of information that relates to these kind of policy choices is really what I'm asking about. I know that's much more difficult to do.
Yeah.
And it's much more valuable.
Yeah, there definitely. This is not a one-stop, shop for research on any kind of given policy opinion. Really, we are kind of gauging things at a 40,000-foot view. We're trying to get the whole state because a lot of times there is a focus on some of our larger communities. There's a focus on Southeast Michigan or Southwest Michigan. So we're trying to really provide a particular entry point into policy opinion, and that's kind of covering everyone and covering a wide range of issues that apply to small townships as well as large cities. And so, yes, I think there definitely needs to be supplementary research to the stuff that we do, to dig in deeper to what we do. We're very fortunate that 72% of jurisdictions across the state are willing to sit for 20 minutes in front of a computer and answer these questions. And every wave we tear our hair out at dropping questions from the survey because we know we can't keep them on much longer. And so there's always stuff that we wish we could cover in more thoroughly, and then also different topics. But so we definitely don't think we're going to be able to answer all the questions, but we're hoping what we can do is give some guideposts into places that we can. This is where people support. This is where people are seeing a challenge, and then hopefully allow the policymakers to dive deeper into that once they see that this is a signpost.
The one other thing that we do try to get at the impact of public opinion is on quite often we'll ask our local leaders what they think either their citizens prefer or their business community prefers or the majority of their board or council prefers and so on. There's actually been some really interesting survey research that shows that the best way to predict a presidential election outcome is not actually doing an opinion poll, or a typical opinion poll, but instead asking people who they think their friends and their associates are going to vote for, and that actually predicts improves the prediction of who's going to win the election. And so we're trying to kind of take the same approach with local leaders. What do you think your citizens would choose? Increasing taxes or further cuts in police and fire? And so we're trying to get at it from multiple ways.
On the other hand, when you ask local leaders, do you think your citizens would support greater taxes in order to avoid service cuts? They say no, no, no. And yet we see across the state millage levels being raised in public votes. So I think sometimes there is a perception. We have to keep in mind that this is the perception of the local official. Where, I think sometimes there's a disconnect in terms of their own political perceptions, and we have to keep that in mind when we're analyzing that kind of thing. All right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Hi. Thank you.
Yeah, the question is whether we break down our data by whether the respondent was an elected official or an appointed official, and we do that. As Deborah said, before we come out with these results that we put in our reports, we do more sophisticated statistical analysis and look for what's driving opinions. And so we normally do take that into account. On some occasions, we found significant differences. One of them is in trust of state government, whether or not local leaders trust the state government to do the right thing. If I recall correctly, I think one of the findings there was that elected officials at the local level tended to have higher levels of trust of the state government than appointed officials did. So it's actually a very interesting thing that we do try to keep a special eye on.
Thank you all. That was really informative. Appreciate that.
Well, on behalf of the Wolverine Caucus, I loved your term, Dr. Horner, encyclopedic knowledge, and you certainly have aided our encyclopedic knowledge today of how we fund local governments. So on behalf of the University of Michigan Office of the Vice President for Government Relations and the Alumni Association, I'd like to present you these wonderful gold Wolverine Caucus pins.
Thank you very much.
We hope that you will enjoy them.
We are both alums, so that's very thoughtful.
Thank you for having us.
And I also just wanted to thank the Michigan Municipal League for the use of this wonderful space. And we are being filmed today by Michael Blondie, formerly of the Michigan Government Television, or MGTV. And so we will have videos available. If you would like one, please let us know of today's information. I know that you will find it very useful in your work. We're always humbled by your presence. Our room is filled today with state and local leaders and university officials. So again, thank you for joining us, and we hope that you'll join us again on Tuesday, March 12th. That's Tuesday, March 12th, when we talk about new jobs creation in Michigan and intellectual property. So without further ado, we will wish you a happy day. Look forward to seeing you in March, and go blue.
That's right. Yeah.